after I jumped on Hinckley, when I finally grabbed him, the first thing that got my attention was the fact that he didn't struggle. He just went limp, relaxed, never struggled. It was almost like he gave up.
Former Secret Service agent Dennis McCarthy, today on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson. Until the attempt on the life of Donald Trump last summer, the most serious assassination attempt in recent American history happened on March 30th, 1981. President Ronald Reagan had just emerged from a speech at a downtown Washington hotel. He was walking toward his limousine. From behind a rope line emerged a young man with a gun. John Hinckley Jr. fired 6 rapid shots, one of which hit President Reagan. Now, instantly, Hinckley was tackled and subdued by a Secret Service agent, and that Secret Service agent was Dennis McCarthy, a 46-year-old veteran of the Secret Service. He'd been around actually since the Lyndon Johnson years. McCarthy spent the next several hours with John Hinckley, who, of course, was ultimately found not guilty by reason of insanity. And you'll hear McCarthy's take on that in just a moment. I met Agent McCarthy in 1985. When he wrote a book called Protecting the President. And we talked not only about what happened that day in March of 81, but what it was like just to be a Secret Service agent and some of his recollections of other presidential administrations. So in just a moment, our conversation.
No, Sherman, this isn't the Wayback Machine, but it is a look back at an interview from the 30-year archive of national radio personality Bill Thompson. Enjoy.
So here now, from 1985, Dennis McCarthy.
Do you often relive the day of March 30th, 1981?
Oh, I'll never forget it, yes.
Do you have nightmares about it?
No nightmares, but there'll be times of moments when, to give an example, I'll be driving along in a car by myself, and my mind is wandering, thinking about various things, and it snaps right back in, and I go right through the whole thing all over again. And it's kind of scary. It's something that you'll never forget as long as you live. I mean, it's an experience. Let's face it, it's sort of like an experience like being a jack-in-the-box for 16 and a half years. And then all of a sudden, someone opened the top, and out I came. And with all that coming out was a lot of stress, anxieties, tensions over the years that you've waited for. And that's something you can never forget. No, you'll never forget it.
You came within a hair's breadth of being shot along with the other people who were shot.
Yes, but I never realized that until about 2 days later. And that's when I started to shake, after about 2 days.
I found something fascinating here. You said you were probably the last person in the country, the day of the shooting, to know who had actually been shot and how badly.
That's right. That's right. Well, if you remember, after I jumped on Hinckley and got him handcuffed, and we got him into the police car and got him to the police headquarters, I was busy doing the type of work, the regular police work now, advising him of his rights, searching him, being sure that he's safe, that no one was going to harm him. Well, it wasn't until about 4:30 to 5, something like this, that the case was actually turned over to the FBI. That's when they physically took control of Hinckley. Well, during this period from the shooting until the FBI took the case over, I was never out of Hinckley's sight. We were together. Now, no one is going to say anything to me about the shooting, who was shot, what had happened, because they didn't want to put any thoughts into Hinckley's head and therefore cause him to say something. So I did not know that anyone was shot I didn't know the president was shot until about 5 o'clock in the evening when I walked out of the interview room. When the FBI agent came and said, Mr. McCarthy, you're relieved, and we'll take over from here. And I walked out, and the room was busy. Everybody was scurrying around, police officers, agents, FBI agents, Secret Service agents. And I turned to someone and said, what happened? And people looked at me like, you don't know what happened? Where have you been for the last few hours? And I said, well, I was with Hinckley. I said, no one would say anything around me. So it wasn't until about 5 o'clock. That's why I say I was probably one of the last people in the country to know that he had been shot.
Certainly they didn't have any radio TV inside.
No, of course not. No. We were in a very sterile situation. There was just 2 other police officers and myself and Hinckley in this interview room. And, of course, we had Hinckley handcuffed to a chair.
Did he appear on that day to be an insane person?
To me, he did not. Sick? Yes. Yes, a sick person. But then I sometimes say, all of us or sick to a degree. It's just a matter of degree. Well, when after I jumped on Hinckley, when I finally grabbed him, the first thing that got my attention was the fact that he didn't struggle. He just went limp, relaxed. And I've fought with many a mentally ill person over my career, and they were like a board. I mean, you couldn't bend an arm. It's just unbelievable. I've fought with a little old lady who was about 5 foot tall and weighed about 95 pounds, and it took 6 of us to get her in a paddy wagon. And I was the smallest guy. The other guys who were trying to help me were like 6'2", 6'3", and we couldn't get this little woman in a paddy wagon. I mean, it was unbelievable. And here all of a sudden was Hinckley, and he just went limp. Never struggled. It was almost like he gave up. And then once I advised him of his rights, once we got to the police station, and we had him up against the wall, we were searching him, and I was advising him of his rights verbally. And as soon as I finished, the first thing out of his mouth was he didn't want to say anything until he had a chance to talk to a lawyer. I mean, this is for someone who is very disturbed. I felt like he was in complete control of his faculties on that day.
Yeah, from an amateur's point of view, it sounds like he was pretty rational.
Yes, he was very rational. Yeah, I found him. Well, another example was when we were in this interview room, and my back and neck started to stiffen up, because after I jumped Hinckley, then there was about 1,000 pounds of other officers that came on top of me. And I was sitting there, and I was rubbing the back of my neck, thinking, well, I may have to get this x-rayed after I finish working. And I was talking to the police officer. Of course, Hinckley was sitting here following the whole conversation. And I said, well, I guess that's what I get for being on the bottom of the pile. Well, Hinckley turned to me and said, no, you weren't on the bottom of the pile. I was. And I looked at him and I said, yeah, he's right. He was on the bottom of the pile. So here again, he's following everything we're saying very rationally, and he's comprehending everything. And I remember thinking at that moment, I said, well, this guy isn't all that crazy, you know. But sick, yeah, I'll go along with that. But then I wonder about Bremer, Arthur Bremer, the one who shot Wallace, and then you have Squeaky Fromm, Sarah Jane Moore. I mean, these are sick people too, but they're doing time in prison.
I have to wonder if security was a problem when Woodrow Wilson was president, when Harry Truman was president. Isn't it almost an insurmountable problem today?
Well, we don't really consider it an insurmountable problem. If we did, we'd have trouble dealing with it. I think we feel that we have to provide the maximum amount of security that we can provide and still give the country a sense of having a president who is available to the people. No, we don't consider it insurmountable. At times it gets pretty tough. And over the years, I think it's gotten tougher since we've left the stage of the horse and buggy. Okay, the stage of the airplane has been a great hindrance in the threat situation, in that someone in California who is extremely sick, I mean, within 3 and 4 hours, he's in Washington, D.C. Back during the horse and buggy time, it would take you months to get across country, and you just didn't travel. With television, there's more of movies. When movies came out, and you would see newsreels of the president and so forth. Now we have television where he's in front of the public on a daily basis. Well, this brings him to the attention of some of, pardon the expression, sickos in the country, and they see him on a daily basis, and their attention is drawn to him more frequently. So we have more difficulty in dealing with the protection as a result of it.
Does it sadden you that we now have to have concrete barriers in front of the White House?
Of course it does. Oh, yeah, of course it does, because it takes away from the beauty of the whole area. But then with the current situation with terrorism and such, we don't need a Beirut happening right in Washington. We don't need that. And so we have to, here again, we're trying to prevent it. We're doing preventative work. And this is one of the things that has to be done. Yeah, I agree. I don't like it either, but it has to be done.
After this short break, Dennis McCarthy talks about some of the more routine aspects of being in the Secret Service.
Are you finding this interview engaging? Curious about the book we're discussing?
Simply click the link in our show notes or visit our website, heardeverything.com, to get your copy.
When you shop through our affiliate links, you're not only enjoying great content, but also supporting this podcast.
Thank you for your support.
Now back to my 1985 conversation with Dennis McCarthy.
Well, the image that most of us have, including many of us in the media, of the Secret Service agents are, as you described, the very stony-faced, grim, all business and no fun type people with this dark glasses, little earphone, little lapel pin.
Three-piece suit.
Three-piece suit,
Yeah.
exactly. But, common sense tells you these people are human and they must have another side, and you've done a very good job, I think, of revealing that other side.
Yes, well, that was my intention. Over the years, I've had many people across the country and around the world who, when they found out I was a Secret Service agent, they would say, "What is it like? What is it like to be a Secret Service agent?" And I end up, over the years, thousands of times explaining it. And I thought to myself, well, it wouldn't be a bad idea if I could just put it down on paper to try and humanize the Secret Service agent so people could understand and get a feel for us and realize that we do take the sunglasses off at times, and that we don't go to bed with them on, and that we don't go to bed with a three-piece suit on. So I was just trying to humanize us. But you also have to remember that when we're in a work situation, okay, we're not thinking about smiling, about being pleasant. We have a very serious job that we're doing. And as a result, you look stony-faced because you're so intent on what you're trying to do. And that's why I guess everybody has that same image of us.
Is it difficult to keep from being distracted when you're on duty?
No. People sometimes try to distract you. I've had people come up and wanting to talk, wanting to converse, to be friendly. And they'll notice that I may answer their question, and I may answer the question very quickly, but I never look at them. My eyes are always someplace else, because I can't afford to be distracted from what I'm there to do, which is to protect the president in many cases, or foreign dignitaries.
Is it frustrating for you as a human being, as an individual, to know that you're standing as history is being made, and you can't watch it because you got to watch this crowd that's watching history being made? No,
I never felt that way. I never thought of it that way. I always felt like if I wasn't doing my job, a different kind of history could be made. Okay? So I wasn't really concerned about what's being said. Very seldom did I ever hear what the president ever said. I wasn't paying attention to it. In fact, I remember one time being at a ball game over for the World Series, and I was positioned in an area where I had to look back up into the crowd. And the Baltimore Orioles, of course, were playing in the World Series, and I never saw a play. I stood there with my back to the playing field the whole time, and people around were saying, "How can you do that?" And I could hear a home run being hit, and the people are screaming, and the expression on my face never changed. I was sitting there watching the people.
That would be probably just the moment that somebody would...
You're right.
If somebody was of a mind to, that they would probably try something in the commotion of the moment.
You're right. And so therefore we can't afford not to pay attention. And that can be very stressful at times. It certainly can.
Before I read your book, I was under the impression, mistaken obvious as it was, that every president and every first lady and members of the first family welcomed Secret Service protection and that they liked having the agents around. They felt very comfortable, but apparently not everyone has felt that way.
No, well, they know what our job is. They know it's a necessity, all right? They don't like being sort of like in a fishbowl 24 hours a day. Everyone likes to have their privacy. And, of course, we can afford to give them their privacy in certain areas. But when you're out in the public, you're moving around, we're in cars with them, we're always visible to them. And it's an understandable thing when they could sometimes, I wish we didn't have the Secret Service. But they know it's a necessity. And, here's another thing that a lot of people don't understand. People, for some reason, think that we are hired for the president, by the president, work for the president. That's not the truth. I mean, we are hired, we were designated by Congress to protect the President of the United States. The President has nothing to say about it. Congress directed us to protect the President. So in a respect, we work for Congress. We work for the people and not for the President, per se.
There are some people who today believe that the current occupant of the White House, President Reagan, has, or perhaps more correctly, his staff, has tried to make use of the Secret Service to keep the press away from the president, to keep various protesters of one ilk and another away from the president. Is that likely? Is that likely to be true?
I've heard that too. Now, you have to remember, I have not been that close to the White House detail in my last 4 or 5 years.
Right.
So I'm not sure exactly what is going on there. I can't imagine the Secret Service being used in that position, because that's being used politically. And we cannot afford in the Secret Service to be a political organization.
Yeah,
we have to be apolitical.
You mentioned a couple of instances in the book during the Nixon re-election campaign, I believe, when an attempt was made on more than one occasion to try to use the Secret Service for...
Yes. And I fought it because I was doing the advance work. And I went to the staff. The staff came. They said they would like to eliminate certain people from being at a public affair. And I said, wait a minute. I said, we cannot eliminate someone from attending a public function because his hair is long, or he has a beard, or he has a pair of Levi's on. I said, now, if the guy is carrying a stick, a weapon of some sort, yes, we can eliminate him, but we cannot eliminate someone for their politics. I said, that's not our job. Our job is to keep him safe, but not to keep someone from shouting obscenities at him or something of this nature. That can't hurt him physically.
There are occasions, I guess, when you have to deceive people in a small way for the protection of the president or the first lady, whoever it is you're assigned to.
Can you give me an example?
Well, what I was getting to was you also had to deceive the very people you were trying to protect a couple of times.
Yes, certainly. Yes.
I found that fascinating.
Yes, well, in order to do our job, sometimes we have to. Are you thinking of a particular incident in the book?
I was thinking about the Lyndon Johnson and the speedboat.
Oh, yes. Oh, my goodness, yeah. And, well, he was the type of individual, he thought he had the fastest speedboat on the lake. And we knew we had the fastest speedboat, and all the kids at the LBJ Lake, they knew we had the fastest speedboat. But it was our job to try and keep him from knowing we had the fastest, because we knew he would take the boat away from us if he found out it was faster. And that's why he was always racing us, because he would think to himself, well, maybe that boat is a little. Well, we had three boats. It was the red boat, the blue boat, and the green boat. And it was the red boat, if I remember correctly, was the one that could whip anything on that lake. Nothing could catch it on the lake. And so the president would every once in a while make us racing. And, of course, we, in a dignified way, would always lose to save face and also to keep our boat.
You also told of Pat Nixon doing something that I take it President Reagan would like to be able to do, and that was just slip away for a few hours to a friend's house in Los Angeles.
But she didn't actually slip away. She didn't actually.
She tried.
She tried, yes. Yes, she tried. And when she had told me what she would like to do, and I told her, I said, Ms. Nixon, I said, I'll have to check with my supervisors to get the approval on that. And she says, well, I don't think that's really necessary. And at this point, I thought, well, there's no sense in trying to argue. I'll just go ahead and do what I have to do. And so as soon as I hung up talking to her, I just called my supervisor and told him what she would like to do. And he said, well, I'll go in and talk to her. And he went in and talked to her. And as it turned out, we did what she wanted to do in a way. In other words, she had me follow her in a separate car while she was in the car with her friend. But what she wasn't aware of was I had a carload of about 8 agents following me. And so once we got into the area where she was it was a nice, secure area anyway. But I had to place my agents in such positions that she would never know they were around. And so I guess that's what you mean by deception. But we were still concerned about her safety, and we couldn't afford to just let her go off by herself.
Yeah, I think you can call it friendly deception.
Yeah, friendly deception.
I certainly didn't mean to imply that.
It was kind of funny, though, when I went to pick her up after the end of the trip, and she looked at me and kind of smiled, and she said, Dennis, she said, did you have any agents up here while we were up here? And I looked at her, and I gave her a little smile. I said, Mrs. Nixon. I said, would I do something like that? And never answered her question directly. I said, would I do something like that?
I had forgotten about this until I saw the picture of it in here. You were on President Ford's ski team.
Yes.
I had forgotten about the ski team.
That was tough duty. That was tough duty.
I vaguely recall at the time, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there was a little bit of difficulty within the Secret Service finding agents who could ski.
True, yeah. Back in those years, of course, I'd learned to ski when I was in the Army overseas in Germany, and kept on skiing over the years. And so I'm a fairly decent skier. I would say I'm probably advanced. I'm not an expert, but I'm an advanced skier, all right? And we did have trouble at first finding enough agents who were into skiing. Now there's no problem. We're all skiing. Well, not all, but I mean, there was no problem in finding. In fact, I would probably be one of the least experienced skiers available as of right now. But at that time, we did have that was quite a thing to be able to be on that ski team. I spent 22 days in Vail, and my only duty was to ski. And, I mean, that's fantastic.
That must have been a hard life.
Oh, that was a hard life. That compensates for a lot of the nights in the halls, standing in a hallway somewhere, bored to death. Yeah.
Dennis McCarthy died in 1993. He was just 58. Now, you can get your copy of Protecting the President by Dennis McCarthy by tapping the link in our show notes, by clicking the link in the description below if you're listening to this on YouTube, or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. Heardeverything.com is where you can also find my 2013 interview with the Secret Service agent who the one who shoved Ronald Reagan into the limousine and sped him to the hospital, Jerry Parr.
I said, I'm taking you to the hospital, and I said it was a certain amount of authority, and he didn't argue. Even if he had argued, I would have said, well, I'm taking you anyway, and then you can fire me. I didn't tell him I thought he was hurt bad.
And my 2010 conversation with the Secret Service agent who in 1963 in Dallas was on the presidential limousine when JFK was shot, Clint Hill.
When she came out in the trunk, she didn't come out there to get out of the car. She came out there to retrieve something that came off the president's head. My job was to get her back in the car.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can find us everywhere you find podcasts. Thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, some history that's a little bit lighter than a presidential assassination. My 2009 conversation with comedian Paula Poundstone.
I did used to work at a bookstore. The entire mystery section was stolen out of the store I worked on while I was on the register. So, which I thought only heightened the mystery.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.